So if I'm the big important professor, then you may speak to me in some ways, and I may speak to you in other ways. And we, through our discussion, we reinforce the power of inequality that doesn't have to exist, but we make it exist by the way that we interact. And that's how certain sociologists define ideology, because it's something that we don't think about. You don't think about making me important. You just come in and sit down in this room, which is organized to make me seem important. And then I stand up here with all the lights on me, and I'm playing this little role as someone who's important. That's ideological. Because if I go like Oprah and sit down next to you and talk, then I break this whole structure. Well, there's a structure that's happened in journalism in the United States that has made journalists more important. Now, is this just journalists like doing a power grab and trying to become more important? I don't think so. If it were, the journalists would be aware of it. No, it's something else, it's something bigger going on. And the example that is most prominent in my mind right now is a study that a colleague in the US did, where she went out to a high school, to several high schools in the Midwest, and talked to the English teacher and the students the English teacher had brought, who happened to be pretty good writers. And they then created a newspaper for their school. Well, they weren't professional journalists. They didn't know anybody who would ever practice journalism. And when she asked them, well, what's it like? What's important to you? What does it matter? What are the rewards of this job? What motivates you? What's your best experience with this work? The stories they tell are almost exactly the stories that these big important journalists in Washington and New York would tell, the ones that I interviewed. So I think it's larger than journalism itself. It's something about American culture that has said, we all are redefining news to be this other thing. And we're going to still believe it's the old thing. Now that part I don't know why, but often ideology works that way. We tend to believe one thing when in fact other things are happening in the background. You find this in Scandinavia a lot, where there's an ideology of, there's an over-discussion of equality, but in fact there are great differences in power and social position, but those are all sort of shown behind the curtain. You don't get to know about it. I think the only people in the United States who are on to what's happened to journalism are young people. And they are abandoning traditional news outlets in droves. They're trying to find any way they can to read something else, to find out information through some other source. And this is a concern for journalists and publishers and news executives in television and radio. But they're mostly worried about, well, how do we get those young people back? They're not concerned, they're not saying, what should we do differently so that our news will be something that young people want to read? And that would require a fundamental redefinition of news. Now, is it bad for news to be long or short? Is it bad for it to have fewer or more people? Well, those questions I don't judge. I'm only saying, this has happened. It's happened in the background. People don't know about it. And I think we ought to bring it out into the open, because the way you disarm ideological work is you expose it. You say, hey, look at the power structure that's operating here. Well, if journalists had some kind of, the only thing we have in the United States are audience ratings, newspaper circulation, and Pulitzer Prizes. I mean, that's it. There are no measures like this that are commonly available to news executives and reporters and journalists. But I suspect that if you worked for a local paper in the United States and you found out that your paper was covering fewer and fewer people and fewer nearby locations and fewer events, you would think about it, at least. And if you were covering, using more of your text to give explanations and more to talk about past events, you think about that as well. And this is a mixed bag. Some things you might want, some things you might not want. You might then engage with young people and say, well, what do you like? And you probably learn a lot. But journalists haven't done that. And I don't know if they ever will. But in short, what's happened is that journalism changed in the United States from being a report of events, it's very demotivated, to the manufacture of social meaning, a very different activity. And I think it's important for journalists and policymakers, as well as the public, to debate whether this new, call it what you want, yada, blah, 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 or whatever, journalism, whatever this innovation is called, does it really add value to news? Does it make it better? Does it make it more useful or meaningful or interesting to readers? Or does it contribute to the current crisis in American news, which has ordinary people abandoning traditional news media, newspapers closing their doors, many thousands of news workers losing their jobs. And those are real people facing real crises in their lives. And yet we're not aware of these changes that are going on. So that's my goal, to spread the word, or to have people just argue with me. So now it's your turn.